Well, welcome everyone. I'm so glad you could take time out of this beautiful evening to come and learn more about voter registration. We do this training, I would say, 2 to 3 times a year. And the purpose of the training is just to give you the information about Ohio laws on how to register voters, how to do voter outreach. We are going to talk a little bit about what's on or what will be in the elections coming up, but we're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about the specific issues and candidates. We're going to be talking more about the nitty-gritty details of, what forms you use and where you go to look up people's voter registrations and things like that. Okay. This has been a really interesting and busy election year here in Ohio. The, two specific developments we're dealing with here in Ohio are that we have new voting laws. So we're going to go over that a little bit at the outset, so you all have an idea of what's changed and how that is affecting voter outreach. And then we also learned a couple of weeks ago that we're going to have a August 8th special election. Surprise! So we are doing quite a bit of voter outreach on that election. The league, just to let you know, does have a position on the issue for the August election, and we are urging people to vote no. However, this is we're doing a nonpartisan training here, so I'm not going to be focusing too much about the pros and the cons of this particular issue. We are really concerned about getting people out to vote for this August election, though. The average voter turnout for an August election is 10% and maybe slightly less than that. So we want to just make sure people are aware that there's an election. It's statewide. Everybody needs to get out there and vote. Okay, so this is the general agenda. We're going to go through all of these in turn. And again, if you have questions as we're going through things, feel free to just shout it out. So the new Ohio voting laws, these were enacted in January. They went into effect in April, so they're brand new. The biggest change is that voters need to present a photo ID when voting in person. And I have more info about that in a further slide that we'll go over. But if you don't take away anything else about the new Ohio voting laws, that's the most important thing. Our voter ID laws have changed. They are now the most restrictive in the nation. So not something to be super proud of, but that is something that you can share with voters. So if someone wants to vote in person or vote early, they're going to have a particular type of photo ID. If someone does not have the required photo ID, they can still vote absentee by mail, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. Other changes that went into effect with voting laws, most have to do with deadlines. So mail-in ballots need to arrive within 4 days of election day, and previously that was 10. If you want to do mail-in voting, you have to apply at least 7 days now before election day. Previously that was 3. It also tightened up rules for drop boxes. Officially now we only have one drop box per county, and a drop box is where voters can go to drop off their absentee ballots if they want to do that outside the hours that the Board of Elections are open. So if they wanted to go and drop off their ballot at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday night, we have boxes, they can do so. But the box has to be located at the Board of Elections on their property. So here in Franklin County, that box is located at 1700 Morse Road. The new laws also eliminate in-person voting the Monday before Election Day. It does take those hours that it was open on Monday and they reallocate those hours to the previous week. I'm not sure if I have a graph in here, but it's a little confusing. But the gist is that there's no longer any in-person voting the day before Election Day. We also have additional restrictions on curbside voting. This is for us, for voter rights advocates, this is disappointing because we would like to see curbside voting be more inclusive rather than less inclusive. So unless a voter has a disability and is unable to enter the polling place, they cannot use curbside voting. And curbside voting is when you vote from your car. So you pull up to the Board of Elections. They have specific slots for that. Someone will come out and you let them know you want to vote in your car. They will have a bipartisan team of poll workers come out and assist you with the voting process. So the law does reduce the number of people that can vote curbside voting. And voters with disabilities have a whole variety of rules and best practices, which we're not really going to get into too much here in this training, but just know that if that does come up when you're registering voters, there are a number of resources both on the league's website and Disability Rights Ohio that really does a great job of going through all the different kind of ins and outs of special situations with voters with disabilities. Okay, so this is a great graphic which illustrates very nicely the new photo ID law. It kind of shows you what the changes are. So we do have one new form of ID that we can use for voting that we could not before, and that is the US passport. So if you have a passport that has your picture ID, you can use that to vote. There are a number of items you can no longer use. That includes the utility bill, bank statement, paycheck, government check, or any other government document. What you can use is your Ohio photo ID, your US or Ohio issued military ID, and your driver's license. And these IDs must be unexpired, so you can't use expired licenses.
Elizabeth, they used to say they couldn't use a passport because there was no address on it. Is there now an address on the passport, or that's just gone by the wayside?
No.
No.
That's a great question. It's just now, it's okay now, apparently. I mean, so it's that there's some questions that have come up with this new law that I agree with you that you're like, but wait, before you said we couldn't do this because of this reason, but now you can. So there's no reason given why that this is now okay. It just is.
Okay.
So, you know, when we look at this list, what we see as a voter rights organization is that it tends to disenfranchise various communities, particularly communities of color, lower income communities that may not have the required documentation, college students, etc.
Well, I was thinking with the passports, a lot of college students have traveled overseas, you know, so a lot of college students might have a passport. I don't know if they did that just to be nice, but, you know, yeah.
Right.
That's what I think it's about.
Yes. So that, you know, that is a positive thing that came out of this new bill, is that now you can use your passport, and those are valid for 10 years. So they are not as likely to be expired when you go to use them. This is just a graphic which shows you when you can use, when you need to use a photo ID and when you don't. If you're going to vote in person early on election day, you need that photo ID. If you are going to do a mail-in, you can just use the last 4 digits of your social security, and you don't need a photo ID. But we'll go through like the mechanics of mail-in voting in a minute here. But that's the summary of the new laws in effect in Ohio. Those will be in effect for the August election as well as the November election and all elections going forward. So who can vote? You have to be a US citizen. You have to be 18 by election day. So again, if you know someone who's 17, they're going to be turning 18 in October, they can register to vote now. They won't be able to vote in the August election, but they will be able to vote in the November election. One of the most important things that I want to make sure everyone's clear about is voters that have previous felony convictions. In Ohio, if you're not currently serving time for a felony conviction, you can vote. The reason it's confusing is because other states have different rules. So in some states, if you have a felony conviction in your past, 30 years ago, and you've served your time, you still can never vote. You can never vote again. But in Ohio, you can vote if you have a felony conviction on your record. The one thing to be aware of is that when you are given your felony conviction, your right to vote is taken away. So your voter registration is invalid. And then when you get out of prison, you will need to re-register to vote. So any previous registration you have is null and void, and you would need to re-register after you get out of prison. Any questions about that? We have a great poem card that comes from the ACLU that you can give out to people if they have any questions about that. It can be a little bit of a touchy subject to bring up, with strangers, but if you're out tabling and you have anyone that shows any kind of interest in it, we have these really great cards that go over the issue. Another special population are homeless individuals. The League does do a variety of voter outreach events at local homeless shelters, especially at the YMCA shelters. I think they have 4 different shelters around the county. So when you're registering homeless individuals, they can still vote even though they do not have a permanent address. Generally, they are allowed to use the address of their shelter. Oftentimes, churches that serve community meals or have food pantries also allow these individuals to use their address as their voting location. So you can register them based on that address. If they want to vote in person, again, these new ID requirements are going to be in play. Oftentimes, individuals that are homeless may not have the required ID. If that's the case, they can look into absentee voting. Again, that's going to take a little bit of follow-up because they will have to mail in an application. They'll have to be at the location, the food pantry or the shelter where they put in as their home address in order to actually get the ballot and then get it back. So it can be a bit of a challenge. I will say, if you are interested in going out and helping us with registration, we often partner with the staff at the shelters and work with them on a plan for what they're going to do in terms of follow-up. So we don't like to just go and register individuals without having that follow-up plan in place. Okay, registering college students. This just got a whole lot more complicated this year because of this ID requirement. We're still trying to figure out the best advice to give to college students, and we're still waiting to see what kind of practical problems they're going to run into on election day. So generally, students can choose whether they wish to register their campus address or their parents' address, and they can kind of flip-flop around on every election if they choose to do so. They just need to fill out a new registration form. The address on their Ohio driver's license does not have to match their campus address. So if they've got if their Ohio driver's license says that they reside in Cuyahoga County and they're going to OSU, that's totally fine. Out-of-state college students are going to have the most problems, I would say, with IDs, because we have been informed that if they apply for an Ohio ID or an Ohio driver's license, this will invalidate their home state driver's license or ID. And this could change their residency and could mess up financial aid and things like that. So the best advice that I can give is for out-of-state students who are going to school in Ohio and they want to vote in Ohio, they should vote early with an absentee mail-in ballot. Okay, so now we're on to the registration form, when I used to do this training in person, I would hand out the registration form and we would kind of, go over it. But I have blocked this out into 3 different slides and blown it up so you can see the details of what's on the form. But it's just a 1-page form. You would use this form to register a first-time voter. You'd use the same form to change a voter's address, like that they moved and they just want to update their address. And you'd use the same form if someone has changed their name. So this form does everything related to registration.
Elizabeth,
yeah,
Elizabeth, is this the same registration form or has it changed?
Great, good point, Mary. It is substantively the same registration form. However, the back of the registration form in previous years used to have the ID requirements on there, and those are now out of date. So if you're doing registration this year, 2023, make sure all your registration forms have a little, they should have like a date when they were updated in the, I think in like the upper right-hand corner, and it should say like February 2023. So if it doesn't say that, you technically can still use that form, but it has some incorrect information on the back. So I would definitely recommend, if you have old registration forms, just recycle them, pitch them, and either download new forms or pick up new forms from the Board of Elections. But the new Ohio law did not change any of the questions that are being asked on this form. So that's all, we're still collecting all the same information. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that they do the checks on questions 1 and 2 about their age and if they're a citizen. They're going to fill out their name, their address, the county where they live, and they'll put their birth date and either their driver's license number or their social, last 4 digits of their social. They do not need a photo ID to do a voter registration. If they're the first time voter, they don't have to fill out this portion at all. This is only if you're updating your address or if you've changed your name, you would fill out this portion. And then at the bottom of the form, you want to make sure the voter signs inside the box. If they sign outside the box, it can invalidate the form. And you also want to make sure that they're putting in today's date and not their birth date. That happens a lot. And so as you can see, it's a pretty simple form, but you'd be surprised how many times people make mistakes or skip boxes. And part of that, can be if I'm out at a voter registration table, I'm talking to the voter, they're trying to fill in the form, and you know how that goes when you're not putting 100% of your concentration onto a piece of paper where you're trying to, put in your personal information. So if you are at a tabling event, I highly recommend asking the voter to hang on just a minute while you look through the form, make sure everything's filled out correctly. Many of the common errors include listing their country, United States, when they need to be listing their county that they live in, that those first 2 boxes aren't checked about age and eligibility. You also want to make sure that they didn't put a P.O. box down on their voting address. The voting address does have to be an actual physical location because the Board of Elections uses that physical location to decide where the voter's polling place is going to be. And finally, you want to make sure that they've written legibly because the staff of the Board of Elections has to try and understand how to spell their name and put in all the information correctly. So please, if you think that the voter's handwriting is illegible, ask them if they can fill out another form. And again, I should also let you know that if a voter is having trouble filling out the form, you can fill it out for them as long as they are present with you. The only thing you can't do is sign in the signature box for them. So even if their signature is an X, that's fine. And you can transcribe the rest of the form for them.
Elizabeth, something I learned when we were registering the kids at the Dublin high schools is some of them don't know their counties because Union County and whatever. And what I learned was if they don't know their county, and I doubt if you're doing it in the places in Franklin County, you're going to have this problem. But if they don't know the county, if you leave it blank, when they put in your information, it'll pop up when they put in your address for you, the Board of Elections it'll pop up for them. So does that make sense? I had no idea. Well, I forget which high school it was, but so many kids had no idea what county they lived in. And it was because of that whole thing with the Union County. I never get out of the house, so how would I know that?
Yes. Sometimes people won't know their social security and they don't have a driver's license number. So there can be some snags. Deborah, did you have a question? You have your hand raised.
Yes.
You.
Yeah, I know. I put it in the chat, but I remember you weren't monitoring it. So one of the issues we've been having, well, I've been having, not really bad, but a lot of the young people are not writing in cursive because they don't teach cursive writing in school anymore. So if they print, is that acceptable as long as that's what they've done on their Ohio state ID or driver's license?
Yes, that is acceptable. However, they choose to write their name, that's, as long as they're using the same, I hesitate to use the word signature, but however they're choosing to sign
As
their
long
name,
as they're
if they're doing that
consistent.
consistently,
Okay.
then that's okay. I think where you could possibly run into problems is if you had a cursive signature on your driver's license and then on your voter registration form, you had written your name in block letters and it didn't look anything like your usual, the way you sign your name.
Okay, thank you.
Elizabeth, if someone makes a mistake on a form, if they put today's date instead of their birth date, can you ask them to cross it out and change it?
Yes, if you do that, just have them initial it on the side, just as a precaution. If you're doing a voter registration event through the league, I often will have volunteers drop off completed forms at my house. And if you do that, I go through the forms again to see if there's any problems. And if there are, I either try and contact the voter through their phone number, or if they didn't leave a phone number, I mail them a letter with the form with an explanation of what's missing or what's wrong, with a new form that they can fill out and mail in. So we try and correct a lot of as many things as we can up front. And with the Board of Elections, it really depends. If they're not in a super busy time, often they will reach out to voters if the voters have put in their phone number. They'll try and contact them and say, it looks like, this isn't the correct address, or, this address is it coming up as in ballot, or, whatever they've missed. But you can't always be sure they're going to do that, because especially during busy stretches of the year, they just don't have the staff time in order to do that follow-up. That's been my experience anyways. Okay, so returning paper registration forms. If you're going to be returning someone else's forms, you have to do that within 10 days. Or if the voter registration deadline is less than 10 days away, then of course you have to return it by the voter registration deadline. The next deadlines coming up are July 10th and October 10th. And if you're in Franklin County, you return them to the Morse Road location. You can return them technically to the Secretary of State's office downtown, but I would recommend just returning them to the Board of Elections office. You can mail them in. I live fairly close to the Board of Elections office, so I just mostly return them in person, but you can mail them in. Okay, so after someone fills out the registration form, you want to let them know what to expect. Within 20 days, the Board of Elections have to process the forms, and they will send out a mailing to the voter, which lets them know where they're going to be voting and any ID requirements for voting in the next upcoming election. So they can, the voter can expect to get something in the mail. TJ, did you have a question?
I did, Elizabeth. In regards to returning the completed voter registration, is it an option to drop it off at the BMV or the library, or is that just way too risky?
I would not recommend doing that. I definitely would not recommend doing it at the BMV. The librarians they're not required to accept that, and they're not required to send it on. So if you don't think you can get it there in person, I would just put them in the mail, because you do have 10 days to get them in. I would definitely not count on the BMV, because they aren't really able to process those forms there. So that's my advice.
On the BMV, a couple of the kids we ran into in the high school who were already 18, and when they got their driver's license, they registered them to vote at the driver's place, which surprised me. I forgot that you could register to vote there.
Yes,
Yeah,
so they
people
are
do that.
supposed to ask you when you go to either get your driver's license for the first time or you go to renew, they are supposed to ask you if you're registered to vote. And if you say no, they're supposed to follow up and say, would you like to get registered today?
Yeah, so there were a couple of kids that were already registered that we talked to.
That's great.
That was why, yeah. Now, can you also register at the libraries?
The
You used to-
libraries will have forms there.
Uh-huh.
And it really depends library to library. Some libraries might have something set up where you can give it to the librarian and the librarian will turn it in for you. But that's not anything that's like statutory or anything they're required to do. So it really just depends on the individual library.
Okay.
But the library is an excellent place that normally has lots of information and normally will have these registration forms and other voting related forms if you need a hard copy. So we just went through what the hard copy form looks like. If you're out in the field, we generally do hard copy voter registrations. However, since 2017, you can register to vote online through the Secretary of State's website. It's going to be all the same information. And that can be, a much easier process for many Ohioans to get registered to vote and for them to update their address. A word of caution, this online registration will not work if you are new to Ohio and do not already have an online footprint in Ohio. And by that, I mean, if you've never paid taxes in Ohio, if you don't have a driver's license, you won't be in the government, in one of the government databases. And so you won't be able to use this. You'll have to fill out an hard copy form. Okay. Voter purges. This is always fun. Statutorily, the Secretary of State has authority to go through and purge the voter rolls. Often this is done for a good reason. We want to keep the voter rolls up to date. If we want to, take off people that have passed away, people that we know have moved out of state and no longer need to be registered here. This tends to happen, I would say, between once a year and 18 months. In February of this year, we had 124,000 Ohioans who were purged from the voter rolls. While most of these voters were taken, off for valid reasons, sometimes, well, every time, there's always some people that get caught up in these purges that shouldn't be taken off the list. So when you're out there registering voters, a great way to start up a conversation is to say, hey, have you checked your voter registration lately? And most people don't even know that you can check your voter registration. So instead of starting off with like, hey, are you registered? you can start off with a different question, which is, have you checked your voter registration? And this is one reason why you would want to check your registration, because you might not know that you were taken off of the voter rolls. And you can check your voter registration very easily. You go to the Ohio Secretary of State's website. It's a very simple process. You just put in first name, last name, and county. So for example, I'm the only Elizabeth Greaser that lives in Franklin County. If I put in my info, my name and my county, an address will come up under my name. And if it says 123 Main Street, I say, oh, it shows that you're registered at 123 Main Street. If that's my current address, then I'm all set. My voter registration is up to date. If I say, oh, I lived there 3 years ago, but now I live at a new address, then you know that the voter needs to update their registration, and they can do that either online or through the hard copy form. And if nothing shows up, then that means that the voter is not in the system and they should fill out a voter registration form. And there's no harm in filling out a voter registration form if the voter is not sure. So there's no penalty if they're registered, but you look up the information and you're kind of unsure about their status. Just to be on the safe side, have them fill out a new registration form. When the Board of Election gets that, they will just process the new form, and that'll be the most up-to-date information. Okay, so voting options in Ohio for 2023. You can vote at your polling location on election day. The next election day is going to be August 8th. You can vote early in person beginning July 11th at the Board of Elections office on Morse Road. Generally, that's during business hours. There are additional weekend hours. And remember, again, there's no early voting the Monday before election day. There is a whole calendar of early voting hours that will be on the Board of Elections website. And we have palm cards that list the Board of Elections early voting hours as well. And early voting hours are the same in all 88 counties. So early voting in Franklin County, same hours as early voting in Cuyahoga County. The third option for voting is absentee mail-in ballots, which also start July 11th. And again, based on the new rules, a voter must apply for one of these absentee ballots by August 1st. I wanted to talk a little bit more about absentee ballots and voting by mail, because that's a multi-step process. We know based on these new voting laws that absentee ballot applications will not be mailed out to registered voters in 2023. In the past, they were sometimes mailed out to all registered voters, but we know that that's not going to happen this year. So if you're out and about in the community and you're doing voter registration, please take along some absentee ballot applications. You can register someone and they can fill out the absentee ballot application at the same time, and we can turn them in together. And that takes care of that all at once. Absentee ballot applications cannot be submitted online, which seems a little crazy to me in 2023, but they have to be printed out, signed, and either mailed or taken in person to the Board of Elections. So it can be a bit of a cumbersome process. If you know someone is thinking about voting by mail, make sure they start the process early, because like I said, it is a multi-step process. We have new absentee ballot applications for 2023. The information that's requested is exactly the same as past year absentee ballot applications, but they have a new form because we have these new voting rules. So you would need to provide your name, your contact information. You can have your absentee ballot sent anywhere. It doesn't have to be sent to the address where you're registered to vote. If you know you're going to be in Arizona for the whole month of July and August, you can get it sent to Arizona, and you can fill out the ballot there and mail it back to Ohio. So it can be sent anywhere. You want to make sure that you are signing this and putting in the date. Number 7, if you see here, it asks you which election you're requesting the ballot for. Of course, it's always, helpful if you select the correct election, but at least in Franklin County, if you send this form in on July 12th and you put primary election, they're going to know what you mean. They're just going to mail you the ballot that's coming up next. So while it's nice to have the correct item checked, it's okay if a voter doesn't. And again, you don't have to have a photo ID. You can just put in the last 4 digits of your social and your date of birth. Tracking your absentee ballot. Sometimes voters can be a little hesitant about doing mail-in ballots because there's so many steps. And because the mail service isn't always 100% reliable, there is a tracking system, which I would say is very similar to how you would track an Amazon package online. You do have to sign up for it. There are links on the Franklin County Board of Elections website. It works quite well. I've tried it a couple different times. The program will send you texts or emails whenever your ballot or your application gets to a certain step. So when the board receives your application for a ballot, they'll send you a text. When they mail out your ballots, they'll send you a text. When they receive your completed ballot, they will send you a text that says received and, put in the system so that you're all done. They've gotten the ballot. I think that gives people a lot of peace of mind. One question I do get is what happens if you apply for an absentee ballot and then you change your mind and you say oh, actually, I don't want to vote by mail. I want to vote on election day. What's going to happen? My advice is that be sure you want to vote by mail before you put in that absentee ballot application. If you go to vote on election day and you've requested an absentee ballot, you will be directed to vote provisionally. So you will still vote. What will happen to that provisional ballot is that it will go back to the Board of Elections. They will look at your profile and kind of match that to see if you filled out your absentee ballot and sent it in, because they want to make sure you're not voting twice. If they don't find anything in the system about your absentee ballot, then your provisional ballot will be counted. However, that's, adding a couple more steps to the process. So if you're on the fence about voting by mail, just once you've applied, I guess I would just say, just go through with the process and maybe the next election you can vote in person. But so that's what would happen if you tried to vote in person after you requested an absentee ballot. Any questions about voting by mail? Okay, so on to what's going to be on the ballot August 8th. There's only one thing on the ballot, and it's an issue 1. It will increase the constitutional amendment approval threshold to 60%. It will also require signatures from 5% of eligible voters in all 88 counties for citizen-led ballot initiatives. Examples of ballot initiatives that are coming down the pike would be the abortion. Well, scratch that because they would not have to comply with that. Things that people are talking about potentially ballot initiatives in the future would be a gerrymandering ballot issue, minimum wage ballot issue, anything you could think of in the future will now have to have 5% signatures of eligible voters in all 88 counties. It also gets rid of the 10-day signature cure period. So, like I said, the league is opposed to this issue. We have a specific coalition. It's called Vote No in August. We have about 250 organizations signed on. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here about, why we're opposed. But we will have hard copy materials. If you're interested in getting some of those materials, I will include a link when I do the follow-up email tomorrow, so you can stay up to date with that. If you don't care one way or the other about your stance on this issue, that's okay. We just want to make sure that people are aware of this election and they are going out and they are voting and they know where their polling location is. Okay. ahead.
Elizabeth, I just wanted to say that the Ohio Restaurant Association is for this issue.
Correct.
And I guess it's because they're afraid that they're going to put something about a minimum wage, like $20 an hour on, you know, they're going to try to get that into the Constitution. Because I got upset when I saw some of the restaurant places that are part of this effort, just to throw that out.
Yep, that's true.
So stop eating at Wendy's. No, it's a joke. Joke.
There are, if you want to get some really interesting opinions and thoughts about this issue, I highly suggest going to your local newspaper or any newspaper in Ohio and reading some of their letters to the editors, because there have been some really great letters to the editors about this issue. And oh, there's so much going down at the State House to even the fact that we even have an August election is a whole issue unto itself. So there are some lawsuits that have been filed, which potentially could stop this election from going forward. However, as the volunteers, boots on the ground, people that are going out there and registering voters, I want everyone to pretend that there are no lawsuits and we're going full steam ahead as if this election is happening no matter what, and we're getting people out and we're letting them know about it. I also wanted to include some information about the November election, because as you're out there this summer, you know, again, we have a lot that's going to be on the ballot in Franklin County. This is a local election year, so we're going to have city councils, local boards of education, city offices, and municipal judges. You know, we could have some statewide ballot issues, including abortion, marijuana legalization, local school levies, things like that. Now, abortion and marijuana legalization, those are not for sure. Those groups are collecting signatures right now. We won't know until later in July if those issues are going to be on the ballot. But there is, you know, a possibility. I would say for some of them, a strong possibility that they will be on the ballot. If you are out doing voter registration in the city of Columbus and you have folks that live, that are residents of the city of Columbus, we are also trying to get out the word that city council has changed how they are structured and how people will be voting. So previously currently we have a 6-member city council. They are all at large. However, starting in November 2023 for this election, we're going to start voting on 9 different districts. So each council member will be assigned to a particular district and they will have to live in that district. But, and this is the part that I think will confuse a lot of voters. If you live in District 1, you will have a particular council member assigned to you, but you'll be voting on all the candidates running in all 9 districts. So we don't want voters to just identify with the district that they're in and only vote for that district. They need to be voting for all 9 districts, all candidates running in all 9 districts. I have palm cards and information on that. We're partnering with the city of Columbus to try and get that information out as much as possible. So if you do voter outreach in partnership with the league, we will have information that you can share with voters about that. Any questions about that? Okay. So on to resources and materials. I've talked a little bit about this. We have a number of hard copy materials that we can share. I'm not sure if I have, let me see if oh no, I don't. Sorry, guys. I thought I had a picture of it, but they're called Power the Vote cards, and they are statewide cards that the league produces, and it just has the basic infos about voting, what ID you need, the early voting hours, things like that. They are not specific to any particular election, so they can be used anytime and in any county in Ohio. Vote 411 is the league website where we have our candidate and issue guide. Likely this is not particularly relevant for the upcoming August election because we're just going to have one issue, but Once we get to September and October, we're going to have candidates that have filled out our questionnaire. People can go and find information on how candidates feel about various local issues in their own words. And then we have a number of hard copy forms that focus on voters that are in special communities. And we also try and have QR codes at all of our booths where voters can do voter registration themselves. If they want, they can look up their city council districts. They can check their voter registration, things like that. Okay, election protection. That is a national group. And this 1-866 Our Vote, we encourage voters to call or text that number if they have trouble voting on election day or during early vote, or if they have trouble voting absentee by mail. So this group kind of collects all the information. They have volunteers on staff that will answer the calls on election day and give the voter advice and ideas about what they should do next. This is very helpful for the voters, but it's also really helpful for us volunteers and voter rights organizations because we get a broader picture of what's happening not only around the country, but in our city. We can tell like, oh, there were 20 different complaints at this particular polling location, and they all had to do with, ID issues. So that helps us pinpoint potentially problematic areas, and work with the boards of elections and the different, polling locations, so we can make sure that all votes get counted if they possibly can. So this number is not just in English, but it's I think it's in about like 6 or 7 different languages. We have election protection yard signs. We have poll monitors that go out and, are there at early vote to help voters if they have problems voting and at various polling locations. So there'll be more information about that coming up as well. I wanted to mention vote writers. We started partnering with vote writers this year when we had the ID requirement changes. They're a national nonprofit organization, and they focus specifically on getting valid voter IDs for voters, and they help them get the underlying documentation. For example, if the voter needs to get a certified copy of their birth certificate and it's $25 and they don't have, the ability to pay for that, Vote Writers helps them. They have volunteers. That was the training that Ellen was mentioned earlier on this session about, getting trained to be one of the volunteers that can work with voters and follow up with them and make sure that they're getting their ID. We are also doing letter writing campaigns. We have one scheduled tomorrow where we have a list of all voters who have used alternative forms of ID, like a bank statement or a cell phone bill, in the past few elections to vote. So we're sending them all information, letting them know that they will need to bring different ID to vote the next time. But they have a lot of great resources, so I wanted to mention that. Tips for voter outreach. Most of you are, I would say quite a few of you are pros at this, so you don't need many tips, but just be friendly and outgoing. Don't get into arguments with people. Be nonpartisan. You don't have to know all the answers. Like for me, when I started doing this, that's what I was most afraid of, that I would go out in public and try and register voters, and they would ask me all these questions that I wouldn't know any of the answers. And it's okay if you don't know the answers. You will have lots of materials with you that can help answer questions. If you do a volunteer event and you have questions, I'm always happy to answer those, or you can direct the voter to either the Board of Elections, or you can give them our office email and phone number and they can follow up with me as well. A lot of times when you're doing voter outreach, you'll ask the question over and over again, hey, are you registered to vote? Have you checked your voter registration? And people will say like, yes, I'm registered. Yes, I'm registered. Yes, I'm registered. And sometimes it can feel a little, like, am I making a difference? But what we are doing in the community, even if someone kind of shuts you down, you brought up the idea of voting to them, and you don't ever know what's gonna make them, take action and think about voting. Or maybe you mentioned that there's an August election and they kind of pretend they don't hear you as they're walking by, but you don't know. I mean, maybe, they did hear you, and that fact that you mentioned that can prompt something in the future for them to go out and vote. So I would say, voter outreach is fun. It's a fun time. If you volunteer with a league, we always try and partner you with someone, so you're not out there by yourself. We do a lot of festivals. We're going to be at the Clippers game next week. So we're at a lot of fun places, and you really get to meet a lot of just great people in the community and other people that are, tabling at these events. They're always fun. So we have a pretty large list of places we're going to be in June, and I am looking for volunteers. I'm going to include the sign up list with the follow-up information I send out tomorrow. And if any of you are interested, and just want to get your feet wet, or you're really you're ready to go and you want to go register voters, please sign up. We'll give you more information. And if you've never done this before, we'll make sure you're partnered with someone who is a voter registration expert. And that's it. Okay. Questions, and I will look at the chat. Does the LWV network have connections in all 88 states? I'm assuming you probably mean the 88 counties. Yes, to varying degrees. Of course, we have a lot of connections in the urban counties. If we're talking about Vinton County, which is down by West Virginia. I used to work down there in Southeast Ohio. There's a lot fewer connections down there, and it's much harder in some of those small rural counties to get like the 5% that you would need. So it's just an added hurdle in a process that's already very hard. But you know what, if that's what we have to do, then that's what we're going to do. But we're hoping that we don't have to. We're hoping we can defeat this ballot initiative, and we can keep that 44 county 5%, because that's already pretty hard.
Elizabeth, someone I was talking to, or I heard, is that some of those 88 counties have hardly any people in them. I mean, it's so unfair to have to get all 88 counties, with whatever that percentage is. It's really ridiculous. So just to throw that in. So 88 would not be good.
So Kristen Sutton, who is one of our, will be as of next week or 2 weeks, one of our new board members, and she works for the Columbus Metropolitan Library. She put in the chat some very useful information that I actually did not know. So thank you, Kristen. But the National Voter Rights Act requires libraries to provide and return voter registration forms. So whoever asked me about if you can turn other people's voting registration forms into the libraries, you can. I'm still not sure if I would necessarily recommend that, but yeah, I didn't know that they were required to return those. But it looks like it's not the same for absentee ballot forms. So thank you, Kristen. That's very helpful. I always learn something when I do this training, which is awesome. Let's see. Yes, and Anna said for the August election, like for example, if the abortion ballot issue if they do collect enough the signatures required for the abortion ballot will not be affected by this issue 1. So they will have to get a 60% approval if they get on the November ballot, but they won't have to get that 5% of all 88 counties. They're still under our current rules, which is 5% of 44 counties, and they will have that 10-day cure period. Let's see. Would you advise people to vote early versus voting absentee? It's hard. It really depends, I think, on the person that you're talking to. We have, if I'm talking to an older population that has trouble, getting out of the house, I advise them to vote absentee, or if they have a disability that makes it difficult for them, to travel even locally, I advise absentee. If you're the type of person that likes to just go in and know that you voted and you witnessed that whole process, which I kind of am, I would advise voting early. I don't think there'll be really any lines for voting early in the August election. One, because there's only one issue on that ballot. So your voters aren't going to take 20 minutes to go through their ballot, like when we have, 3 or 4 pages of candidates and issues. And the second being that it's probably just going to be lower turnout anyway. So it'll be a fast trip. But if you live in Canal Winchester in Franklin County, it's a long trip up to Morse Road. So, for folks that don't live close to Morse Road, like that could be like a half-hour trip. Just one way to go up there, which is a little crazy. So there's not really a specific way that I would recommend. I think it really just depends on each voter's circumstances. Okay.
Can I ask to clarify one more time?
Yes.
So if this August issue passes, the abortion ballot, only part of that August issue will go into effect, not the entire thing. So
correct. So if the August issue passes and the abortion ballot initiative has enough signatures to get on the ballot, they will have to get a 60% approval in November for that ballot to pass. But they won't have to have shown that they've collected signatures in all 88 counties. They will only have to show that they've collected the signatures in 44 counties and they've got that 5% number. Yes, but any other ballot, any future citizen-led ballot initiative is going to have to do that. And that's really going to put a damper on a process that is already extremely hard and takes a lot of money. So anything else? Okay, well, I will follow up tomorrow with some links and a sign up list so you can view our upcoming volunteer opportunities and see if you want to sign up, and a link to this recording. Please, if you know of other individuals that are interested in registering voters, please share this. We at the League just always want to make sure, even if you're not doing voter registration with the League, that people out there are doing it effectively and they know all the rules. So okay. Well, have a great night. Enjoy the rest of this beautiful day. Thank you, everyone.
See you next week.
Bye, Kara.